Here's a very good example of erosion, and this is the sediment that comes down the hill slope. And you can see it's very disturbed soil, and there's also a lot of these perennial Canada thistles that usually is very common in this type of material. As we're going up the slope, you can kind of see the gully erosion here pretty easily. So this has gotten worse every year. A lot of disturbed soil, and also a lot of weeds. So a lot of soil moving around, a lot of weeds. You can even see in some cases here, you can see a lot of rocks. So this is a great example of gully erosion. You start this shot by looking at the hill slope. So you've got probably 15% slope here. And eventually the water picks up speed. As it picks up speed, it carries with it sediment and eventually forms this gully erosion. You can see the gully erosion. I'll walk down to the base of this slope. So I'm walking about 30 meters. This is about a 30-meter gully. In both sides of the gully, you can see there's quite a bit of these really small annuals, a lot of weeds coming up. At the base, you'll actually be able to see the deposition of the soil. Okay, all this is soil that's been deposited off of the top of the slope. What's kind of interesting, if you look closely, for those of you who know your weeds, your weedy species, these are all Canada thistle. So Canada thistle is a noxious weed. It's perennial, and it loves all this fertility that comes washing off of the slope. And as we continue on here to this little wooded area, in the wooded area, you can actually see there's some garlic mustard here. There's a garlic mustard. And there's also more of the Canada thistle. Okay, because this is a lot of nutrients that come down into this from this gully. This gives you a little bit of view of the site. I'm going to stop it right there. Here's another good example of erosion. We're down at the foot of the slope, and you can see all this depositional material. Once again, in the background, you can see almost exclusively bush honeysuckle. Even if you can make it out, there's a little bit of the garlic mustard in the understory as well. So we're going to kind of head up this gully. And this is a little more extensive than the one we were previously looking at. So we're dealing with probably about 12% slope, 10 or 12% slope. But I'm going to walk you up the gully. And one reason we see so much erosion is each year this is being farmed just soybean after soybean after soybean. And there's very little residue on the ground. And what that does is it doesn't limit the amount of erosion. So if you look at your universal soil loss equation, which we'll talk about in class, one of the factors that goes into predicting soil loss is the cover. So what kind of cover is on the surface? The intensity of the rainfall is important, as is the texture of the soil, but cover is very important. That's one of the main features of no-till crops, is that some cover remains. And in this case, this was a no-till system, but there's very little, you can see this very little residue on the surface. See a lot of annuals, a lot of annual weeds here early in the year. So we're going up to that Glenwood series we've talked about so many times in the semester. So right up on the top of here we'll be in a Glenwood. Here's another gully. This is pretty steep. Pretty deep, I should say. I'm going to jump down in it, kind of give you a little bit of a view. And it's so deep that there's no way that the farm equipment can farm. They're kind of farming around this. You can kind of see the soil. We're down into definitely down to the B horizon here. I'm gonna walk you down through it. So this one's about probably 60 meters. So it's a Sunday afternoon. I thought it'd be kind of neat to show you a few things out in this farm field. Hopefully everybody's doing well. See here the erosion off that surface. So there's many rivulets that form gullies together, almost a dendritic pattern like you've learned about in hydrogeology. So quite a dendritic pattern of gullies flowing into this major gully. Get down here and you can kind of see it a little bit more at hand. And once again, a lot of weeds. Where the soil is super disturbed, you see a lot more weeds, and there's a lot of nutrients that are washing into here as well. So when you have a lot of nutrients washing in, okay, you're going to get this production, this overproduction of weeds, as opposed to the rest of the field. I'm going to walk down to the depositional area. So the slope is starting to flatten out, less energy, and they're actually able to farm over the gully here. We're going to walk down here to the typical Indiana edge. Look at all this deposition. So all this material has been deposited on the surface. And eventually the vegetation here slows everything down. So along this edge you can see once again a lot of bush honeysuckle. If we walk up this slope a little bit, we'll be back on that Glenwood. Tell there's a lot of honey locust trees here. See the pods everywhere on the surface. If you look out across here, occasionally you'll find pieces of flint. And I've talked a lot this semester about flint. I'm going to put some down on the ground, some pieces I found. We can kind of take a look at them. These are all pieces that I found. And I just walked upon an artifact. So that's a very crude projectile point. Very, very crude. It looks to be probably, I'd say early to middle woodland. So it's the base looks very much like the Dina, like an Adena point that you'd find around the mounds in Anderson. So it's kind of an interesting point. And just walking the farm fields looking for basically gullies to talk to you guys about in your soil science course, but you come across ancient civilizations. So all these pieces of flint I've picked up, and they weren't really worth turning the camera on for, but I think this one was. This is kind of neat. I'll turn it over again. It's kind of crude. Wish it had been a little nicer, but that's what we got today. So I hope you guys are enjoying your Sunday afternoon. I'm surely enjoying mine. A lot more right now. Okay, we're going to look at another fairly large gully. See up to the top of that slope. But once again at the base, a lot of nutrients, a lot of sediment, fine sediment. So all the A horizon has been displaced to another location. So very near this low area, which was too wet to farm. So that's the reason this area is not farmed. But let's walk up the gully. As we're walking up the gully, we're still in the area of the deposition. It's in the depositional area. Still in the area of deposition. Now we're kind of in the gully, the main gully. And it's about 1.5 feet deep at the top. Get down here a little bit so you can see what's going on. Once again, there's side gullies that are coming into the central gully. You guys can see those. The length of slope is also important. I talked about the universal soil loss equation. In hydrogeology, you might talk about that, but the length of the slope, the actual gradient of the slope, the cover, the soil type, all those features are important. Jump up here to the top of this. I'll swing it back around to kind of get an overall view of where we're just at. There's the silo from the barn. It's a general location.